I never told my family that I own a $1 billion empire. My family thinks I'm a waitress in Queens living on tips. They don't know I'm the CEO of the firm currently liquidating their entire life. Tonight is their 40th anniversary gala, the most important night of my father's career. He doesn't know the caterers, the security, and the private jet waiting outside all report to me. I'm not just coming for my inheritance, I'm coming for the crown. Stay tuned, because the look on his face when he sees the signature on the merger is worth more than the $1 billion I'm about to steal. I remember the smell of Minnesota winters. It's not just the scent of pine or wood smoke. It's a metallic, biting cold that doesn't just touch your skin. It bites into your bones, reminding you of every chill you've ever felt. It's the smell of a place that never wanted me. I sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV, my fingers tracing the stitching of the Italian leather seat. Outside the window, the world was a blur of gray and white skeletal trees reaching out like frozen claws against a leaden sky. 10 years. It had been exactly 10 years since I walked down the driveway of my childhood home with nothing but a duffel bag and a spirit so bruised I wasn't sure it would ever heal. Back then, my father didn't even look up from his newspaper. He told me I was a drain on the family legacy. He said my creative whims were a cancer to the family name. And my sister, Sarah, she stood by the window, laughing as she watched me try to hail a cab in a torrential downpour. She didn't offer an umbrella. She offered a smirk. They think I'm still that girl. They think I've spent the last decade drifting from one failed waitressing job to another. They think I'm coming home today because the money ran out and the failure has finally come to beg for scraps. They have no idea. They have no idea that the car I'm sitting in costs more than the house they're so proud of. They have no idea that the Phoenix Group, the anonymous venture capital firm that bought out their primary competitor last month, is run by a woman they haven't spoken to in a decade. They don't know that I am the one who owns their debt. I am the one who holds their future in my palm. And tonight is the night I decide whether to close my fist. Before I tell you how I walked into that lion's den and stripped them of everything they loved, look at that subscribe button. If you've ever been the underdog, if you've ever been the one the family talked about in whispers at dinner, hit it now. Prove you're part of a circle that values loyalty over legacy. And for those of you who won't, for those who will just watch and leave, go to the comments. Tell me why you're okay with being a ghost. Tell me why you're afraid to commit to a story that actually has stakes. I'll be waiting. The SUV slowed as we reached the gates of the Wayzata estate, my father's monument to success. It was a sprawling glass and stone monstrosity overlooking Lake Minnetonka. It looked like a fortress. To them, it was a palace. To me, it was the place where my dreams went to die. "We're here, ma'am," my driver, Marcus, said softly. He looked at me through the rearview mirror. He was the only one who knew the truth. He'd seen the bank statements. He'd seen the billion-dollar acquisitions. "Do you want me to wait out front?" "No, Marcus," I said, my voice as cold as the ice on the lake. "Park in the back. I want to walk in through the front door. Alone. I want them to see me coming." I stepped out of the car. The wind hit me instantly, whipping my hair across my face. I wasn't wearing a fur coat or designer logos. I chose a simple charcoal gray wool coat and a plain black dress. I wanted to look average. I wanted to look like the girl they remembered. Just a little more tired. A little more defeated. I reached the massive oak doors. I didn't knock. I pushed. The warmth of the house hit me, thick with the scent of expensive catering and overpriced cologne. The foyer was filled with people, the elite of Minnesota society. Men in tuxedos talking about market volatility and women in silk gowns comparing their latest surgical enhancements. And then I saw her. My mother. She was standing by the grand staircase, holding a glass of champagne like it was a scepter. She looked exactly the same, perfectly coiffed, perfectly cold. When her eyes met mine, she didn't smile. She didn't rush over to hug her daughter who had been gone for 10 years. She put her glass down on a passing waiter's tray and walked toward me with a look of profound disappointment. "Alara," she said. Not a greeting. An accusation. "Hello, mother." She reached out, but not to touch my face. She took a lock of my hair between her fingers and tutted. "You've let yourself go. And this coat, it's so functional. Didn't I teach you that presentation is everything? I didn't come here for a fashion critique, Mom." "Then why did you come?" "Your father is in the middle of the most important merger of his life. We didn't think you'd actually show up after the letter." "The letter?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. The invitation to the anniversary gala, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. We only sent it to fulfill a legal requirement for the trust. We didn't expect you to have the audacity to walk through that door looking like this. I looked past her. At the top of the stairs stood my sister, Sarah. She was wearing a dress that probably cost $30,000. She was holding a glass of wine, staring down at me with a smirk that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't happy I was home. She was excited to watch me fail. Elara, you made it, Sarah called out, her voice echoing through the foyer, drawing every eye in the room toward us. She descended the stairs with a practiced grace, her heels clicking like a countdown timer. When she reached me, she leaned in for a fake air kiss. I was just telling David, you remember David, right? My husband? The one you had a crush on in high school? She giggled, a sharp metallic sound. I was telling him I hoped you'd found a way to afford the bus fare back from whatever hole you've been living in. I felt the eyes of the guests on me. The whispers started. Is that the youngest daughter? The one who went crazy and ran away? She looks so ordinary. And I gripped my purse. Inside was a phone that could authorize a $200 million wire transfer in 3 taps. But in this room, under these lights, I felt small. I felt like the girl who used to hide in the library to avoid Sarah's friends. I'm doing fine, Sarah, I said quietly. Clearly, Sarah said, gesturing to my plain coat. Look, Dad is in the study with the investors. He's about to sign the deal that saves the company. Why don't you go to the kitchen? Maria made some hors d'oeuvres. Maybe you can help her serve? It might be the only way you contribute to this family tonight. She laughed, and my mother joined in. A soft, polite laugh that hurt worse than a scream. I walked away. Not to the kitchen, but toward the back hallway, the path to my father's study. I knew this house. I knew the floorboards that creaked and the ones that stayed silent. I stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of the study. Through the crack, I could hear his voice. My father, Howard Sterling. The man who taught me that love was something you earned with a high ROI. It's a simple deal, my father was saying. We sell the 40% stake to the Phoenix Group. They provide the liquidity, we keep the name, and we phase out the underperforming assets. And the family trust? Another voice asked. A lawyer. The trust is being restructured tonight, my father replied, his voice hard as granite. My daughter Sarah will take over my seat on the board. My son, Julian, gets the real estate holdings. And the other daughter, Elara? There was a long silence. I held my breath. Elara is no longer a factor, my father said. She's a liability. Tonight, at the gala, I'm making it official. I'm disinheriting her completely. Not a cent. Not a share. She's dead to the Sterling legacy. I closed my eyes. I expected to feel a sharp pain. A break in my heart. But instead, all I felt was a cold, shimmering clarity. He thought he was pruning a dead branch. He didn't realize he was cutting the power line to the entire building. I pulled my phone from my purse. My thumb hovered over the screen. I opened my encrypted messaging app. Me, Marcus. Are the proxies in place? Marcus, yes ma'am. The board has already received the anonymous notification. They think it's a routine audit. They have no idea the buyer is you. Me, good. When he tries to sign that contract tonight, make sure the system flags the signature as unauthorized. I want him to feel the floor drop out from under him in front of everyone. I tucked the phone away. The failure was about to have her debut. I turned back toward the ballroom. The music had swelled. The party was in full swing. My father was about to step onto that stage to announce his greatest triumph and my ultimate humiliation. He didn't know that the Phoenix Group he was so desperate to join was a name I chose because I had to burn my old life to the ground to build it. I walked into the light of the ballroom, a ghost entering a feast. Enjoy your champagne, Dad, I whispered to the empty hallway. It's the most expensive drink you'll ever have. Because tonight, it's costing you everything. They say blood is thicker than water, but in a family like mine, blood is just something they use to sign a contract. They taught me that everyone has a price. They just didn't expect mine to be $1 billion. The ballroom was a sea of false smiles and borrowed prestige. I stood near a marble pillar, watching them. My family. They moved through the crowd like royalty, oblivious to the fact that their kingdom was built on sand and the tide was coming in. Sarah was in her element. She was holding court near the buffet, her husband David standing behind her like a well-trained golden retriever. I watched her whisper something into a socialite's ear, then glance over at me and smirk. I knew that look. It was the look she gave me when she broke my favorite porcelain doll at age 6 and told Mom I did it myself. It was the look of someone who had never been told no. Still here, Alara? I didn't have to turn around to know it was David. He smelled like expensive scotch and desperation. 10 years ago, he was the guy I thought I loved. The guy who told me he'd run away with me, only to dump me the second my father threatened to cut his internship short. He chose the Sterling name over me. Then he married it. It's a big house, David, I said, my voice flat. Hard to find the exit when you're looking at all the things that used to be yours. David stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, I'm sorry about tonight. Your dad. He's in a mood. If you need a little cash to get back to the city, I can slip you a few hundred. Just don't make a scene, okay? This merger is everything to the family. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fine lines of stress around his eyes. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about his own position. He was a parasite feeding on a dying host. Keep your money, David. You're going to need every cent of it soon. He frowned, confused. What's that supposed to mean? It means the champagne is starting to taste a bit sour, don't you think? I walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing there with a look of mounting unease. I moved toward the bar, ordering a club soda with lime. I needed a clear head. Across the room, I saw my father emerge from his study. He looked revitalized. He had the dealmaker's glow. He walked straight to the microphone at the front of the room and tapped it twice. Thump. Thump. The room fell silent. The quartet stopped playing. Friends, family, and esteemed colleagues, my father began. His voice was deep, commanding the voice of a man who believed he was the master of the universe. Tonight marks 40 years of Sterling Holdings. We've survived recessions, market crashes, and personal setbacks. He glanced at me for a split second. A personal setback. That's all I was to him. A line item that needed to be erased. But tonight, he continued, we enter a new era. I am proud to announce that Sterling Holdings has secured a partnership with the Phoenix Group. This infusion of capital will allow us to expand globally, making us untouchable. The room erupted in applause. My mother beamed. Sarah looked like she was about to pop with pride. However, my father's voice dropped, becoming somber. Growth requires sacrifice. It requires us to be honest about who belongs in our future. Legacy isn't just about blood, it's about merit. And tonight, I am officially updating the Sterling Trust to reflect those values. This was it. The public execution. He wanted to do it in front of everyone so I would be too ashamed to ever come back. He wanted to make sure the failure knew exactly where she stood. 0. I reached into my clutch and felt the cool metal of my phone. I didn't unlock it yet. I wanted to hear him say the words. I wanted to feel the full weight of his betrayal so that when I pulled the trigger, my hand wouldn't shake. I've invited our new partners to join us tonight. My father said, scanning the room. The representative of the Phoenix Group should be arriving any moment to sign the final documents publicly. It is a symbol of our new, unbreakable bond. He looked at his watch, then at the door. A flicker of anxiety crossed his face, just a flicker. While we wait, he said, trying to maintain his composure, I'd like to invite my daughter, Sarah, to the stage. Sarah, as the new primary beneficiary of the Sterling Trust. The crowd began to clap, but I wasn't looking at Sarah. I was looking at my phone. New notification, wire transfer blocked. Reason, internal audit triggered by majority shareholder. I looked up and caught my father's eye. I didn't look away this time. I didn't duck my head in shame. I smiled a slow, predatory smile that stopped him mid-sentence. Is something wrong, Dad? I called out from the back. You look like you've seen a ghost. The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat, his face reddening. Alara, this isn't the time. We'll discuss your situation. In private after the guests leave. Oh, I think now is the perfect time, I said, stepping forward. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I could see Sarah's face turning from smug to horrified. You were talking about merit, weren't you? About who deserves to be part of the future. Sit down, Alara, my mother hissed, stepping toward me. You're embarrassing yourself. No, mother, I said, my voice rising, echoing off the high ceilings. I'm finally introducing myself. Just then my father's assistant, a nervous young man named Peter, ran onto the stage. He whispered something into my father's ear. My father's eyes went wide. He grabbed Peter's tablet, his fingers frantically scrolling. What do you mean, unauthorized? My father barked, forgetting the microphone was still on. The signature is mine. The accounts are mine. Sir, Peter's voice crackled through the speakers. The Phoenix Group, they didn't just invest. They've been buying up the secondary debt for months. They triggered a hostile takeover clause 10 minutes ago. We don't own the majority anymore. The room went cold. I could see the sweat beads forming on my father's forehead. He looked like a man watching his reflection shatter. Who? My father whispered into the mic. Who bought it? I took another step forward. I was only 10 feet away from the stage now. I pulled my phone out and pressed a single button. On the giant LED screen behind my father, the one meant to show the new Sterling logo, a single document appeared. It was the Articles of Incorporation for the Phoenix Group. And there, at the very bottom, in bold, black ink, was the name of the CEO, Alara Sterling. The gasp from the crowd was a physical wave. Sarah dropped her wine glass. The red liquid splattered across her white designer dress, looking like a fresh wound. My father turned around, staring at the screen. He looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. You wanted to talk about the trust, Dad? I said, my voice smooth and dangerous. Let's talk. Because as of 5 minutes ago, I own this house. I own your company. And I'm thinking about making some very drastic cuts. They say you should never burn bridges, but they forget that sometimes the only way to see your path forward is by the light of the fire behind you. My family didn't just burn the bridge, they blew it up. They just didn't realize I learned how to fly. I stood there watching the screen. My name, Alara Sterling. It looked so foreign up there, typed in a cold, serif font, projected over the man who had spent 24 years trying to make me feel invisible. The silence in the ballroom was different now. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of a car wreck. Everyone was frozen, waiting to see who would crawl out of the debris. My father turned back to me. His face wasn't red anymore. It was gray, a sickly ashen gray. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. This is a joke, he stammered, his voice thin. A prank. You don't have this kind of money, Alara. You're a waitress. You're a failure. You were living in a studio apartment in Queens 3 years ago. I said, my voice steady. And while you were busy checking the stock prices of your failing subsidiaries, I was sitting in that studio apartment, building the algorithms that would eventually swallow you whole. 10 years ago, when I left Minnesota, I didn't have a plan. I only had a laptop and a deep, pulsing ache in my chest. I remember sitting in a Greyhound station in Chicago, counting my last $40. I remember the cold, that same Minnesota cold that seemed to follow me everywhere. I had spent my whole life being told I didn't have a business mind. Because I cared about ethics. Because I cared about the people behind the numbers. My father called it a weakness. So, I decided to turn that weakness into a weapon. I started small. I coded in the dark while my roommates slept. I built a platform that predicted market shifts based on social sentiment, the very human emotions my father ignored. It grew. Then it exploded. By year 4, I was a millionaire. By year 7, I was a ghost in the financial world. I created the Phoenix Group as a shell. I wanted to see if my family would ever reach out to me if they thought I had nothing. I waited. And waited. The only person who ever called was my Aunt Martha. My father's sister. The black sheep who they'd kicked out of the family years ago for marrying the wrong kind of man. Alara, a voice called out from the side of the stage. I turned. Aunt Martha was standing there. She wasn't dressed in silk or diamonds. She wore a simple pantsuit, her gray hair tied back. She was the only one not looking at the screen with horror. She was looking at me with a tired, proud smile. The crowd gasped. My father's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. Martha? He hissed. What are you doing here? I told security you were barred from the property. The property belongs to the Phoenix Group now, Howard, Martha said, walking up to the stage with a cane that clicked firmly on the wood. And as the chief operating officer of the Phoenix Group, I invited myself. The room spun. My mother grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. You? My father whispered. You helped her? I didn't just help her, Howard, Martha said, her voice turning sharp. I watched you treat this girl like garbage for 2 decades. I watched you steal her inheritance from her grandmother to reinvest it into your failing ego. I watched you break her, so when she came to me with a way to take it all back, I didn't just sign up. I invested every dime I had. You traitors! Sarah screamed. She stepped forward, her face contorted, the red wine on her dress now looking like a badge of her own instability. You think you can just walk in here and take what's ours? This is our legacy. This is our name. I stepped onto the stage. I was finally on the same level as them. The name is mine, Sarah, I said, standing inches from her. I bought the trademarks. I bought the patents. I bought the very ground this house is sitting on. You aren't Sterling anymore. You're just guests. I turned to my father. And guests who have overstayed their welcome. Alara, please, my mother said, her voice finally breaking into a sob. We're your family. Family? I asked. I felt a single tear sting my eye, but I refused to let it fall. Family is a word you use when you want something. For 10 years, I was a drain. For 10 years, I didn't exist. Where was family when I was shivering in that bus station, Dad? He didn't answer. He couldn't. I pulled a second document up on the screen. This one was a spreadsheet, thousands of lines of data, highlighted in red. You told everyone tonight that this merger would make you untouchable, I said to the room. But here is the truth. Sterling Holdings is $300 million in the hole. My father has been cooking the books for 5 years, using the family trust to cover interest payments on bad real estate gambles. The whispers in the crowd turned into a roar of shock. These were investors. These were people whose money was tied up in my father's lies. He didn't invite me here to disinherit me, I said, looking at the guests. He invited me here because he needed a scapegoat. He was going to blame the restructuring on my financial incompetence to explain why the dividends were stopping. I looked at my father. He looked like he was having a heart attack. Is that true, Howard? An investor shouted from the front row. I can explain, my father stammered. No, I cut him off. I'll explain. The Phoenix Group has decided to decline the merger. Instead, we are calling in the debts. All of them. Effective immediately. The room descended into chaos. Men in suits were shouting. My mother was wailing. Sarah was trying to scrub the wine off her dress with a napkin, looking like a madwoman. I leaned into the microphone one last time. The bar is closed, I said. The party is over. Security will be here in 20 minutes to escort everyone including the owners off the premises. This house is being seized. I looked at my father who was leaning against the podium for support. I'll see you in court, Dad, I whispered, loud enough for only him to hear. I hope you like the taste of that legacy now. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But they're wrong. Revenge is a fire. And if you're not careful, it'll burn you just as badly as it burns your enemies. I had the house, I had the company. But as I looked at my father's broken face, I realized the war was only just beginning. The chaos didn't last as long as I thought it would. Wealthy people have a way of disappearing the moment they smell a sinking ship. Within 30 minutes, the friends who had been toasted to my father's success were scurrying to their valets, whispering into their phones, trying to save their own portfolios before the morning news broke. I stood in the center of the empty ballroom. The smell of spilled wine and expensive perfume felt suffocating. My staff now moved like ghosts in the background, clearing away half-eaten shrimp cocktails and crystal flutes. I was the queen of the castle. I had won. So why did I feel like I was the one who had been buried alive? I heard the click of heels behind me. I didn't have to turn around. My mother's scent jasmine and expensive gin reached me first. Are you happy now, Alara? She asked. Her voice wasn't screaming anymore. It was hollow. You've humiliated your father. You've destroyed your sister's future. You've turned our home into a crime scene. I turned slowly. She looked older than she had an hour ago. The harsh overhead lights caught every wrinkle she had spent thousands of dollars trying to hide. I didn't turn this into a crime scene, Mom. I said, my voice barely a whisper. Dad did that when he started stealing from the trust. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the bodies. We did it for you. She snapped, her eyes flashing with a sudden desperate anger. We had to keep the company afloat so there would be something left for all of you. We were protecting the Sterling name. No. You were protecting your country club membership. You were protecting your image. You didn't give a damn about me when I was sleeping on a floor in Queens. You didn't even call on my birthday for 3 years. We were giving you space to grow, she cried. You were giving me space to die. I corrected her. And I didn't die. I grew teeth. As my mother retreated into the shadows of the hallway, I felt a pull toward my father's study. I needed to see it. I needed to see the place where the lies were manufactured. But as I walked past the grand staircase, I saw a light flickering in the small storage room under the stairs, the closet of failure, as Sarah and I used to call it. It's where they kept the things they didn't want the world to see. I pushed the door open. Sarah was there. She wasn't the polished heir anymore. Her hair was coming undone, and she was frantically shoving papers into a shredder. Sarah? She jumped, a scream dying in her throat. When she saw it was me, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. Get out. You don't belong here. This is still my house. Actually, it's not, I said, walking toward her. And those papers? They belong to the Phoenix Group now. Stop shredding, Sarah. You're only making the inevitable harder. You think you know everything, she hissed, clutching a thick blue folder to her chest. You think you're so much better than us because you made a few $1 billion. You're still just the girl nobody wanted. What's in the folder, Sarah? I stepped forward and snatched the folder from her hands. She tried to fight me, but she was weak, fueled only by panic. I opened it. I expected more financial records. More evidence of my father's fraud. But what I saw made the blood in my veins turn to liquid nitrogen. There were letters. Dozens of them. Postmarked from New York. Dated from 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 5 years ago. They were my letters. The letters I wrote to my parents during my first 2 years away. The letters where I begged for a second chance. The letters where I told them I was hungry. The letters where I told them I had finally landed my first big tech contract and wanted to share the news. They were all unopened. But that wasn't the worst part. Stapled to the back of my letters were checks. Checks sent from my father's office to a private investigator in New York. I read the investigator's reports. Subject has secured a seed round of $500K. Recommendation: initiate legal pressure through patent litigation via shell companies to drain her resources. My father hadn't just ignored me. He had been actively trying to sabotage my business from the shadows. He had been the anonymous lawsuits that almost bankrupted me in my second year. He had been the one who leaked my proprietary code to competitors. My own father had been my greatest enemy, and I never even knew he was in the room. I looked up at Sarah. She was crying now, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of a cornered animal. You knew, I whispered. You knew he was trying to ruin me while I was starving. He said it was a test, Sarah screamed. He said if you were a real Sterling, you'd survive it. And if you didn't, then you were better off gone. I felt a roar building in my chest, not of sadness but of a cold, calculated fury. I realized then that my revenge hadn't been enough. Taking their money was a mercy, taking their house was a gift. I looked at the blue folder, then back at my sister. A test? I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm level. Well, tell Dad he failed. And now? Now I'm going to make sure the world knows exactly what kind of legacy he really built. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. Marcus? Cancel the private settlement offers for my father's debt. We're going to the FBI. I want every offshore account, every bribe, and every letter in this folder on the front page of the Times by morning. Sarah collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. I didn't even look back. I walked out of the closet of failure and back into the grand foyer. I saw my father standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. He saw the blue folder in my hand. He knew. Elara. He started, his voice trembling. Don't, I said, pointing a finger at him. The daughter who would have forgiven you died in a NYC basement because of you. The woman standing here now? She's just the person who's going to watch you lose your name. They say the truth will set you free. But they never tell you that sometimes, the truth is a cage. My father tried to lock me out of his world, But in doing so, he built the very prison he's about to spend the rest of his life in. The blue folder was just the beginning. I spent the next 4 hours locked in my father's study. My study now. I had Marcus bring me a carafe of black coffee and a team of forensic accountants who were currently working remotely from 3 different time zones. The house was quiet. My mother had retreated to her bedroom, and the sounds of Sarah's sobbing had eventually faded into a heavy, resentful silence. My father was, somewhere, probably pacing the hallways of a wing he no longer owned, trying to figure out which of his loyal friends would take his call. I sat at the desk, the light of my laptop reflecting in my eyes. I was looking for the paper trail of the sabotage Sarah had mentioned. But as I dug deeper into the Sterling Family Trust archives documents that had been password protected for 30 years, I found something that made the sabotage look like a playground spat. I found a name I hadn't heard since I was 5 years old. Evelyn Thorne. Evelyn Thorne was my grandmother. My mother's mother. The family story was that she had died penniless, her eccentric investments having drained her estate before she passed. My father always used her as a cautionary tale. "Don't be an Evelyn," he'd say whenever I showed an interest in the arts or technology. She died with nothing because she didn't respect the Sterling way. But the digital ledgers told a different story. I stared at a transfer record from 1998. An estate settlement. My grandmother hadn't died penniless. She had died holding 15% of the early shares in a burgeoning telecommunications giant. At the time of her death, those shares were worth a few million. Today, with the splits and the dividends, they were worth nearly $400 million. And according to her original, unedited will, they weren't left to the Sterling Holdings Group. They were left to me. Specifically, they were held in a blind trust to be released on my 25th birthday, contingent on me finding my own path. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. I scrolled further. 10 years ago, the very month I was kicked out of the house, there was a series of internal transfers. My father, acting as the executor of the trust, had flagged me as mentally unfit and estranged. He had used a signature that looked suspiciously like a forgery to dissolve the blind trust and move those assets into the Sterling General Fund. He didn't just kick me out. He robbed me of my birthright to fund his own ego. He used my grandmother's legacy to pay for the very diamonds Sarah was wearing tonight. I wasn't just a failure to him. I was a bank account he could loot as long as I stayed estranged. "You okay, boss?" I looked up. Marcus was standing in the doorway, holding a fresh tablet. "I'm fine, Marcus," I lied. My hands were shaking. "Did you find the offshore link?" "Better," Marcus said, sliding the tablet onto the desk. "We tracked the private investigator Howard hired in New York. The guy didn't just report on you. He was paid to bribe your early landlords to evict you. He was paid to intercept your mail. And Ilara, there's one more thing." I looked at the tablet. It was a recorded deposition from a former assistant of my father's, taken during a separate lawsuit years ago that had been buried. The assistant spoke about a young woman who had come to the office 8 years ago. A woman who looked like a Sterling. I remembered that day. I had taken the bus from New York back to Minnesota. I had finally made my first $10,000. I was so proud. I went to my father's office to show him. To tell him I was sorry for being a disappointment. The receptionist told me he was in a meeting all day and refused to see me. I waited for 6 hours in the lobby before I finally gave up and left, crying all the way back to the station. The deposition said something else. Mr. Sterling saw her on the security feed. He told me to call the police and report a trespasser if she didn't leave. Then he told me to call her landlord in Queens and tell them she was involved in a criminal investigation so they'd terminate her lease. I lost my apartment 3 days after that trip. I spent 2 weeks sleeping in a 24-hour deli. I thought it was just bad luck. I thought the world was just cruel. I didn't know the world was my father. I closed the laptop. The silence in the room was now heavy with the weight of a decade of stolen life. I got up and walked to the wall safe behind the desk. I knew the code. It was the date of my father's first IPO. Inside wasn't just cash. It was the physical stock certificates, the emergency backups he kept because he didn't trust the digital age. I took out the certificates for the family estate, the deed to this very house. I heard footsteps in the hall. Heavy. Arrogant. Even now, he walked like he owned the world. The door opened. My father stood there. He had changed into a silk robe, trying to reclaim some dignity. He held a glass of brandy. Get out of my chair, Alara, he said, his voice a low growl. You've had your fun. The lawyers will be here in the morning. Hostile takeovers can be tied up in litigation for years. You might own the debt, but you don't own me. I turned the chair slowly to face him. I held up the blue folder and the tablet. I'm not interested in litigation, Dad, I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. I'm interested in the FBI. And I'm interested in Grandma Evelyn's 15% stake. The brandy glass slipped from his hand. It shattered on the hardwood, the amber liquid soaking into the rug like a bloodstain. How? How did you find that? He whispered. You should have hired a better IT guy, I said, standing up. I walked around the desk until I was inches from his face. You didn't just steal my money, Howard. You stole my life. You tried to break me so I wouldn't be strong enough to realize you were a thief. I leaned in, my voice a lethal whisper. I was going to let you stay in the guest house. I was going to give you an allowance. But after seeing this, I want you out. Not in 24 hours. Now. There's a blizzard outside, Dad. I suggest you start walking. Maybe you'll find a 24-hour deli to sleep in. They say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But they're wrong. What doesn't kill you just gives you a longer memory. My father thought he was teaching me a lesson about the world. He didn't realize he was just giving me the blueprint on how to destroy him. The blizzard didn't stop my father. In fact, it gave him cover. I watched from the second-story window as he struggled into his heavy coat, his hands shaking so violently he could barely button it. He didn't walk into the snow. He called a private car, one he likely paid for, with the last of the cash hidden in his study wall. I watched the taillights disappear into the white curtain of the Minnesota night. He wasn't going to a hotel. I knew that man. He was going to the one place he thought he still had power, the board. He's moving, isn't he? I turned. Aunt Martha was leaning against the doorframe, holding 2 mugs of tea. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were sharp. He's heading to the city, I said. He thinks if he can get a quorum of the board members together before the markets open, he can declare the Phoenix Group's acquisition predatory and freeze our voting rights. Martha handed me a mug. He's lived his whole life on handshakes and backroom deals. He thinks he can talk his way out of a mathematical certainty. Then let's show him that the math has already changed, I said. By 2 a.m., the Sterling dining room had been converted into a command center. Marcus and 2 of my lead analysts were on a secure video link. Alara, we have a problem, Marcus said, his face illuminated by the blue light of 3 different monitors. Your father didn't just go to the board. He went to the banks. He's trying to claim that the Phoenix Group is a front for foreign interference. It's a desperate play, but it's enough to trigger a 48-hour suspense period on the transfer of the estate deed. I felt a surge of heat in my chest. 48 hours. In that time, he could shred documents, move offshore assets, or even file for a fraudulent bankruptcy to shield the house. He's trying to lock me out of my own victory, I whispered. Not just that, Marcus added. Sarah is on the phone with the press. She's spinning a story about the prodigal daughter coming home to elder abuse her parents and steal their life's work. If that hits the morning news, the Phoenix Group's reputation takes a hit before we even go public. I looked at the tea in my hand. I could feel the old Alara, the one who wanted to hide, trying to crawl back to the surface. But then I looked at the blue folder sitting on the table. The letters, the sabotage, the theft of my grandmother's legacy. Marcus, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Who is the lead director on the board? The one person my father trusts most. That would be Arthur Vance, Marcus replied. They've been friends for 30 years. Their kids grew up together. Call Arthur Vance. Tell him I have the forensic audit of the Special Projects Fund. And tell him that if he meets my father tonight, he's not just a friend, he's an accomplice to securities fraud. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a local number. Arthur Vance. Alara? The voice was old, gravelly, and laced with fear. I just got a very disturbing message from your people. Hello, Arthur. I assume you're currently in a car on your way to meet my father at the club. We were going to discuss the legality of your takeover, Arthur stammered. Let me save you the trip, Arthur. My father has been using your firm to launder the rear investment fees from my grandmother's trust. I have the wire transfers. If you step into that club tonight, you're not just saving a friend, you're joining him in a federal cell. But If you turn that car around and send me the board's private bylaws regarding moral turpitude clauses for CEOs, I might forget your name was on those documents." There was a long, heavy silence. I could hear the sound of a blinker clicking in the background of the call. "I always told Howard he underestimated you," Arthur whispered. "The bylaws are in your inbox. I'm going home, Alara. Don't call me again." I looked at Martha. She gave me a small, grim nod. One down. But the victory was short-lived. A loud crash echoed from the kitchen. I stood up, my heart racing. I walked toward the back of the house, Martha close behind me. The kitchen was a mess. A window had been smashed. Sarah was standing there, a heavy iron skillet in her hand, her face wet with tears and snow. She wasn't alone. Two men in dark suits, my father's private security, were standing behind her. "The lawyers might be slow," Sarah hissed, her voice cracking. "But we still have the keys. And Dad said you're not allowed to leave this house with a single piece of family property. That includes those servers, Alara. And that folder." One of the men stepped forward. He was huge, his presence a physical threat in the cramped kitchen. "Hand over the files, Miss Sterling," he said. "We have orders to secure all company assets." I didn't back down. I looked at the man, then at my sister. "You're bringing hired thugs into our childhood kitchen, Sarah? To protect a man who robbed us both?" "He didn't rob me," she screamed. "He gave me everything. And you're not taking it." I reached into my pocket. I didn't grab a weapon. I grabbed a small, black remote. "Sarah, look out the window," I said calmly. Through the falling snow, the dark driveway was suddenly flooded with light. Not from the house, but from the headlights of 6 identical black SUVs. Dozens of men in Phoenix security tactical gear stepped out, moving with a precision that made my father's hired help look like amateurs. "I didn't just buy the company, Sarah," I said, stepping closer to her, ignoring the man in the suit. "I bought the security firm that protects it. These men? They don't work for Howard anymore. They work for me." I looked at the 2 men behind her. "Clock out, boys. Your final checks will be mailed to your agency. Unless you want to spend the night explaining to the local police why you're breaking and entering a private residence." The men looked at each other, then at the fleet of SUVs outside. Without a word, they turned and walked out the back door. Sarah dropped the skillet. It hit the tile with a deafening clang. She sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. "It's over, Sarah," I said softly. But as I looked at her, I saw a flashing light on her phone, which was lying on the counter. A text message from my father. "Dad, don't worry about the house. If I can't have it, nobody can. Check the basement furnace." 3 a.m. I looked at the clock on the wall. 2:58 a.m. They say that desperate people do desperate things. But I forgot that my father was more than desperate, he was prideful. And to a man like Howard Sterling, burning it all to the ground was better than letting a failure sit on the throne. 2:59 a.m. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a bomb. When I saw that text on Sarah's phone, time didn't slow down like it does in the movies. It shattered. My father wasn't just a thief or a liar. He was a man who would rather see his children burn in the wreckage of his legacy than admit he'd been defeated. "Sarah, get out. Now," I screamed, grabbing her by the arm and dragging her toward the back door. "What are you doing?" "Let go of me," she shrieked, still clinging to the shards of her dignity. "The furnace, Sarah." Dad rigged the furnace. The confusion on her face lasted for exactly 1 second before a muffled whump shook the floorboards. It wasn't an explosion, not yet. It was the sound of a pressure valve failing. The scent hit us immediately, natural gas, thick and sweet, rising through the vents like a ghost. I didn't run for the exit. My servers were in the dining room. 10 years of proprietary code, the evidence against my father, the keys to my empire. If that gas hit a pilot light, the Phoenix Group wouldn't just be grounded, it would be vaporized. "Marcus, get the team to the basement. Shut off the main line." I yelled into my headset. "Alara, the gas levels are peaking. It's too dangerous." Marcus's voice crackled with static. "I don't care. Do it." I ran toward the basement door. The air down here was heavy, shimmering with heat. My father had spent 40 years maintaining this estate, and he knew exactly which pipe to loosen, which safety sensor to bypass. This wasn't an accident. This was an execution. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The furnace was roaring, a mechanical beast pushed past its limits. And then I saw him. My father wasn't gone. He was standing in the shadows by the water heater, a wrench in one hand and a lighter in the other. He looked like a specter, his eyes wide, his silk robe stained with grease. Dad? What are you doing? My voice was a jagged whisper. You think you can just take it? He rasped, his voice barely audible over the hiss of escaping gas. You think you can just walk back in here after 10 years and claim what I built? No. If you want the sterling name, Alara, you can have it in the ashes. Dad, put the lighter down, I said, stepping forward. Sarah is upstairs. Mom is in her room. You're going to kill them too. He paused. For a second, I saw a flicker of the man who used to tuck me in at night. The man who used to tell me I could be anything. But then, he looked at the lighter. They stayed, he whispered. They stayed because they were weak. They stayed for the money. You left. You were the only one strong enough to leave, and now you're the only one strong enough to destroy me. I can't let you win, Alara. I can't let the failure be the one who survives. He wasn't trying to save his legacy. He was trying to punish me for succeeding without him. My success was the ultimate insult to his ego. He didn't hate me because I was a failure, he hated me because I was better than he ever was. I'm not the one who destroyed you, Dad, I said, my heart breaking for the last time. You did that the day you decided money was more important than your daughter. Suddenly, the basement door burst open. Marcus and 2 security guards rushed in, wearing gas masks. They didn't hesitate. They tackled my father to the ground, the wrench clattering across the floor. One guard grabbed the lighter. The other lunged for the gas main, wrenching the lever into the off position with a scream of effort. The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the hiss of the dying furnace and my father's ragged breathing as he was pinned to the concrete floor. I stood over him. He looked so small. So pathetic. Take him out, I said to Marcus. My voice was dead. No anger. No heat. Just nothing. Call the police. Give them the phone. Give them the footage. I want him charged with attempted arson and reckless endangerment. Alara, please, he wheezed. Don't, I said. You had 40 years to be a father. You chose to be a landlord. Your lease is up. I walked back upstairs. The gas was clearing, but the house felt tainted. I found my mother and Sarah in the foyer, wrapped in blankets, shivering as the Phoenix security team ushered them toward the waiting SUVs. My mother looked at me, her eyes red from crying. She reached out a hand, but I stepped back. The guest house is off limits, I said. Marcus will give you the address of a hotel. I've paid for 1 week. After that, you're on your own. Sarah, the jewelry stays. The car stays. You walk out with what you brought into this world. Sarah looked at me with a hollow, haunted expression. Where are we supposed to go, Alara? We have nothing left. You have exactly what you gave me 10 years ago, I said, looking her in the eye. Opportunity. Let's see if you're a real sterling and survive it. As they were let out into the snow, my phone buzzed. A private number. I answered it. Is it done? A voice asked. It was a woman's voice. Cold. Professional. Familiar. The house is secure, I said. The debt is called in. Howard is in custody. Good, the voice replied. But you missed one thing, Alara. Check the offshore account labeled Vanguard. Your father wasn't the only one stealing. There's a third party involved. Someone you haven't even suspected yet. My blood ran cold. Who? I asked. Look at your mother's maiden name again. And then look at the board of the bank that funded your first startup. The anonymous investor who helped you. It wasn't just luck. I dropped the phone. I looked at the black SUVs disappearing into the blizzard. My mother. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just a bystander. I ran to the dining room and pulled up the bank records I had downloaded earlier. I bypassed the sterling filters and went straight to the source of my own initial funding, the angel who had saved me when I was starving in New York. The name on the wire transfer wasn't Phoenix. It wasn't Martha. It was a shell company owned by the Thorne estate, my mother's side of the family. She had been funding my rise while my father was trying to fund my fall. She had been playing both sides of the war for 10 years, waiting to see which of us would win. In the game of power, there are no bystanders. Only players you haven't noticed yet. I thought I was the one pulling the strings, but I was just another piece on a much larger board. My mother didn't want a daughter, she wanted a winner. And now that I've won, I have to wonder what she's going to ask for in return. The snow had stopped, leaving the world outside buried in a deceptive, pristine white. But inside the Sterling estate, the air was toxic. I sat in the dining room, the Thorne estate documents spread out before me like a map of a secret war. My mother, Eleanor, had always played the part of the dutiful, long-suffering wife. She was the one who smoothed over my father's outbursts with a gentle hand and a practiced smile. I had spent years pitying her. I thought she was a bird in a gilded cage. I didn't realize she was the one who built the cage. And she was the one who held the keys to my father's madness all along. "You can come out now, Mother," I said, not looking up from the screen. "I know you didn't get into that SUV." The shadow in the doorway moved. My mother stepped into the light. She had shed her blanket and her tears. She looked perfectly composed, her hair back in its tight, elegant bun. She looked like a woman who had just won a long-awaited bet. "You were always the smartest of the three, Alara," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of the tremors from an hour ago. "Sarah has the ambition, but she lacks the stomach. Julian has the name, but he lacks the brain. But you have the Thorne blood." "The Thorne blood?" I stood up, my chair screeching against the floor. "You watched me starve. You watched Dad try to dismantle my company. You knew he was stealing my grandmother's inheritance and you just watched?" "I didn't just watch," she said, sitting at the head of the table, the seat my father had occupied for 40 years. "I ensured you. Who do you think leaked the Vanguard account details to your forensic team tonight? Who do you think made sure the gas main didn't actually explode when Howard turned it on?" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Minnesota winter. "You sabotaged the sabotage," I whispered. "You wanted me to come back. You wanted me to take him down. Your father was a dinosaur, Alara. He was bleeding the Thorne legacy dry to keep his ego afloat. If I had divorced him, he would have dragged the estate through decades of litigation. But if his own daughter, the one he publicly exiled, returned to legally seize the firm through a hostile takeover." She leaned forward, her eyes cold and predatory. "Then the Thorne assets remain untainted by his bankruptcy. You did the dirty work I couldn't do from the inside. You were my Trojan horse." I looked at the woman I had called mother. She hadn't funded my startup out of love. She had funded it as an investment in her own coup. I wasn't her daughter, I was her exit strategy. "You think we're partners now?" I asked, a dark smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "You think I'm going to let you sit there and enjoy the spoils of a war I fought in the trenches?" "We are the Phoenix Group, Alara," she said simply. "Together, we can rebuild." "No," I cut her off. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. "You missed one detail in your insurance policy, Mom. You used a Thorne shell company to fund me. But that shell company was funded by a loan against this house. A loan that my father defaulted on last week." Her composure flickered. "Just for a second. What are you saying?" "I'm saying that because I own the debt, I now own the shell company. And because I own the shell company, I own the Thorne estate. You didn't use me to save your legacy. You handed it to me on a silver platter." I slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was an eviction notice, but it wasn't for my father. It was for her. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I'm your mother." "My mother died when she let her husband hunt her daughter for sport," I said. "You're just a shareholder. I'm buying out. At a deep, deep discount." I turned to Marcus, who was standing in the corner. "Marcus, prepare the press release. Howard Sterling is in custody for attempted murder and arson." "And Eleanor Sterling?" "She's retiring for health reasons. Effective immediately. She'll be moving into a modest condo in the city, one with very thick walls. I don't want to hear her screaming." My mother stood up, her face finally twisting into the rage she had hidden for decades. "You'll have nothing. The board will never support a girl who destroyed her own parents." "The board already signed, Mother," I said, holding up the tablet. "They'd rather have a girl who can pay their dividends than a woman who's about to be investigated for conspiracy." As security moved in to escort her out, I walked to the window. The sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, turning the snow-covered lake into a sheet of gold. I had the house. I had the company. I had the Thorn legacy. But as I watched my mother being led to a regular taxi, no SUV, no silk, no status, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a restricted number. I answered, expecting a lawyer. Elara? It was a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years. A voice that sounded exactly like mine. It's Julian. I heard what you did to Dad and Mom. You think you've won? You forgot about the third sibling, sis. And I'm currently standing in your server room in New York. In a family of vipers, you never worry about the one biting your leg. You worry about the one you haven't seen since you were a child, waiting for the moment you think you've finally won. My brother, Julian, the golden boy, was back. And he wasn't here for a reunion. He was here to delete everything. Julian, my older brother. The golden boy. The one who could do no wrong. While I was the failure and Sarah was the socialite, Julian was the ghost. My father had sent him to oversee the European expansion 5 years ago, but in reality he was being groomed. He was the secret weapon my father kept in reserve, far away from the mess of the Minnesota estate. Julian? What are you doing in New York? I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk so hard my knuckles turned white. I'm doing what Dad was too proud to do, Elara. His voice came through the line, smooth and terrifyingly calm. I'm protecting the family. You thought you were the only one who learned how to code in the dark. Who do you think helped Dad track your early patents? Who do you think wrote the backdoor into the Phoenix Group's initial security audit? My heart stopped. The anonymous lawsuits. The proprietary leaks. It wasn't just my father. It was the brother I used to share my secrets with. I'm looking at your primary core right now, Julian continued. I could hear the rhythmic clacking of a mechanical keyboard on his end. The Phoenix Group is a beautiful machine, sis. Truly. But like every machine, it has a kill switch. And I'm about to flip it. Julian, stop, I commanded, trying to steady my breath. The feds are already here. Dad is in handcuffs. Mom is gone. If you do this, you're not saving the legacy, you're just becoming a felon. A felon? He laughed. It was a hollow, empty sound. In 10 minutes, the Phoenix Group's assets will be diverted into a decentralized trust in the Cayman Islands. By the time your forensic team figures it out, I'll be a citizen of a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty. I'm not saving Dad. I'm taking the winnings and leaving the table. I looked at my monitors. The red alert wasn't just a warning. It was a countdown. You're stealing from me? I whispered. After everything they did to us? They didn't do anything to me, Elara. They gave me the world. And you? You were just the noise in the background. But I have to admit, your $1 billion empire is the best gift you could have ever given me. I turned to Marcus. Trace the IP. Kill the New York uplink. Now. Marcus's fingers flew across his tablet. I can't, Elara. He's using a ghost shell. He's not actually in New York. The call is being bounced off a satellite in the North Sea. He's already on a plane. I felt the room tilt. I had spent 10 years building this fortress, brick by brick, only to find out my own brother had been living in the vents the entire time. I wasn't the hunter tonight. I was the bait. Julian hadn't come home to save our father. He had waited for me to do the hard work, to consolidate the debt, to seize the assets, to put everything into one neat billion-dollar pile so he could swipe it all in one move. You have 5 minutes, Elara, Julian's voice returned. 5 minutes until the Phoenix Group goes dark. Unless you want to make a deal. What kind of deal? The Minnesota estate. The house. The land. Give it back to Sarah. Let her have her little kingdom. In exchange, I'll leave you with 10% of your holdings. Enough to live a comfortable life. Far away from here. I looked out the window at the frozen lake. Sarah. He wanted to protect Sarah? Why, Julian? Why her? Because Sarah is the only one who didn't try to be a god, he said. She just wanted to be a sterling. You wanted to be a conqueror. And there's only room for one of those in this family. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air of the room settle my nerves. Julian was the golden boy. He was the genius. But he had one fatal flaw, the same flaw my father had. He underestimated the failure. You're right, Julian, I said, my voice becoming eerily soft. There is only room for one conqueror. But you forgot one thing about the Phoenix Group's security. The typing on the other end stopped. What's that? I didn't write the code alone. I had a silent partner. Someone who knows your style better than anyone. I looked at Aunt Martha. She nodded and pressed a final key on her own laptop. Suddenly, the red countdown on my screen turned green. System recovered. Access denied to external user. J. Sterling 88. What? What did you do? Julian's voice lost its calm. I could hear the panic rising. I was in. I had the encryption keys. You had the keys Dad gave you, Julian, I said. But Martha? She's the one who taught you how to code when you were 12. Did you really think she wouldn't leave a backdoor in your backdoor? I watched as the trace on the map finally locked onto a coordinate. It wasn't New York. It wasn't the North Sea. Marcus, I said. Send the coordinates to the FAA. There's a private jet currently flying over the Atlantic with a passenger carrying stolen corporate data and evidence of international money laundering. Alara, wait, Julian shouted. Goodbye, Julian, I said. Tell Dad I said hello when you see him in the exercise yard. I hung up. I sat back in the chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had stopped the bleed, but the wound was deep. My entire family had tried to kill me tonight, my father with a lighter, my mother with a shell company, and my brother with a line of code. But as I looked at the screen, I saw one final notification. A file Julian had tried to delete before he was kicked out. Title: The Sterling Foundation, Project Rebirth. I opened it. My breath hitched. It wasn't a business plan. It was a list of names. A list of every person the Sterling family had ruined over the last 40 years, and at the very top of the list was a name I recognized. My own. But beneath it was another name. Someone I hadn't thought about in a decade. They say that in a war of all against all, the only winner is the one who realizes the war was a lie. I thought I was fighting for justice. I thought I was fighting for my legacy. But as I looked at that list, I realized, the Sterling family didn't just have secrets. We had a shadow, and that shadow was about to step into the light. The sun was fully up now, bleeding a pale, watery light across the snow outside. But inside the study, the shadows were getting longer. Julian's failed hack had left behind a digital carcass, and I was picking through the bones. That list, Project Rebirth, wasn't just a list of victims. It was a ledger of sins. My father hadn't just been cooking the books, he had been paying hush money for decades. But it was the name at the top that made the air in the room feel thin. Leo Thorne Sterling. Thorne Sterling. I whispered the name to the empty room. I knew the Thorne name, it was my mother's. I knew the Sterling name, it was the curse I carried. But Leo? I had no brother named Leo. There was Julian, Sarah, and me. That was the story. That was the portrait on the wall. I looked at Aunt Martha. She was staring at the screen, her face as white as the snow on the lawn. She looked like she had seen a ghost, or like she was finally seeing the one she'd been hiding. Martha, I said, my voice trembling. Who is Leo? Martha sank into a chair, her hands shaking as she reached for her tea. I told myself I'd take this to my grave, Alara. Your father, he made sure the records were erased. He made sure the doctors were paid. He even made me sign an NDA that would have bankrupted me if I ever breathed a word. Martha, tell me. Leo was the firstborn, she whispered. Before Julian. Before Sarah. Before you. He was the one Howard was going to build the empire for. But Leo, he wasn't like Howard. He had a soul. He found out about your father's first major fraud, the one that launched Sterling Holdings. He was going to go to the authorities. So Dad did to him what he tried to do to me, I realized, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening thud. No, Martha said, looking me in the eye. He did worse. He didn't just exile Leo. He had him committed to a private psychiatric facility under a false name. He told everyone the baby died of a fever. He even had a small empty casket buried in the family plot. I felt a surge of nausea. My father hadn't just been a bad man. He was a monster who had erased his own son to protect a pile of money. Where is he now? I asked. The facility closed years ago, Martha said. But the Project Rebirth file Julian had, that's the tracking. Julian wasn't trying to save the family, Alara. He was trying to find Leo before you did. Because if Leo is alive, he's the rightful heir to the Thorne estate. Not you. Not Julian. And certainly not Howard. I stood up. The mission had changed. This wasn't just about a hostile takeover anymore. This was a rescue mission. Marcus, I barked. Marcus appeared in the doorway, already holding his tablet. I'm ahead of you, boss. I've tracked the payments from the Rebirth Fund. They lead to a small assisted living facility in northern Minnesota. It's disguised as a nonprofit. The bills are paid by a shell company Julian was managing. Get the car, I said. And call the lawyers. I want a writ of habeas corpus ready by the time we hit the city limits. We drove north, deeper into the wilderness. The further we got from the glitz of Lake Minnetonka, the more the world felt honest, raw, forgiving. I looked at the file on my lap. Leo would be 35 now. What kind of man do you become when your own father buries you alive in a ward for 15 years? We pulled up to a gray, nondescript building surrounded by a chain-link fence. It looked like a prison disguised as a hospital. Stay in the car, Marcus, I said. I need to do this alone. I walked up to the front desk. A woman with tired eyes looked up from a clipboard. Can I help you? I'm here for Leo, I said. I didn't use a last name. We don't have a Leo here, she said, her voice practiced and flat. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed my business card on the counter. The one that said CEO, Phoenix Group, and next to it, I placed a copy of the wire transfer Julian had sent to their facility last month. I own the company that pays your salary, I said softly. And I'm currently deciding whether to keep this facility open or report it to the state for human trafficking. Now, where is my brother? The woman's face paled. She didn't say a word. She just stood up, took a heavy ring of keys from her belt, and signaled for me to follow her. We walked down a long, sterile hallway that smelled of floor wax and old soup. We passed doors with reinforced glass. We passed people who looked like they had forgotten their own names. She stopped at the very end of the hall. Room 402. He doesn't talk much, she whispered. He draws. That's all he does. She unlocked the door. The room was small, but every inch of the walls was covered in paper. Sketches. Hundreds of them. They weren't just drawings, they were maps. Maps of the Sterling estate. Maps of the boardroom. Maps of my face? I stepped inside. A man was sitting by the window, his back to me. He was thin, his hair prematurely gray, but his shoulders were square. Leo? I whispered. The man didn't turn around. He kept drawing. The failsafe is in the foundation, he said, his voice raspy and dry, like he hadn't used it in years. If you pull the center stone, the whole thing comes down. That's what Howard doesn't know. I built it to break. I froze. Leo, it's Alara. Your sister. He finally turned. His eyes were the same color as mine, a deep, piercing green, but there was a fire in them that I hadn't expected. He wasn't broken, he was waiting. I know who you are, he said. He stood up, and I realized he was holding a tablet, one identical to the one Julian had. You think you rescued me, Alara? Leo smiled, and it was a terrifyingly familiar expression. It was the smile of a Sterling who had finally found his mark. I've been inside your servers for 3 years. I'm the one who gave you the Phoenix Group seed money. I'm the one who led you home. They say that the truth will set you free. But they don't tell you that the truth has its own agenda. I thought I was the mastermind. I thought I was the hero of this story. But as I looked at my brother, I realized I was just the final piece of a plan that had been in motion since before I was born. The drive back to the estate was the longest hour of my life. Leo sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the Minnesota landscape with the eyes of a man seeing the world for the first time in 15 years, and yet, he seemed to know every turn of the road. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a storm front moving toward the coast. You're the one, I whispered, my hands tight on the steering wheel. The angel investor. The one who bypassed the thorn shell companies. It wasn't Mom. It was you. Leo didn't look at me. He kept his gaze on the horizon. Mom provided the capital, but she was too scared to use it. She wanted to wait for the right time. I didn't wait. I hacked the facility's terminal 3 years ago and redirected her guilt payments into your New York accounts. I knew if I gave you the lever, you'd be the one to move the world. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. For 10 years, I thought I was alone. I thought I was a self-made titan of industry. But I was the spearhead of a ghost's revenge. We pulled up to the gates. The police tape was still fluttering in the wind, a yellow scar across the stone pillars. My father had been processed and released on a massive bail money Julian had likely funneled from a secondary account before I locked him out. He was back in the house, a king without a crown, waiting for the lawyers to save him. I stepped out of the car. Leo stepped out beside me. We didn't use the back door this time. We walked straight up the front steps. I pushed the doors open, and for the first time in 40 years, the two people Howard Sterling tried to delete walked into his foyer together. My father was sitting on the stairs, a bottle of expensive rye in his hand. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. When he heard the doors, he didn't even look up. "Go away, Elara," he groaned. "The lawyers are filing the injunction. You can't stay here." "I'm not here for the house, Howard," I said. Beside me, Leo stepped into the light. The bottle slipped from my father's hand, thudding onto the carpet but not breaking. He froze. His entire body began to tremble, a primal, visceral fear taking hold of him. He looked like he was seeing a demon. Leo?" He choked out. "Hello, Father," Leo said. His voice was no longer raspy. It was a cold, melodic baritone. "I heard you told the world I died of a fever. I've spent 15 years in a room with no windows, and I still feel warmer than you look right now." My father tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He slumped against the banister, gasping for air. It was for the family. The scandal. The Thorn merger would have collapsed if they knew about your condition. "My condition was that I knew you were a thief," Leo said, stepping closer. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. "I found the 1,992 embezzlement records. I was 18. I thought you were a hero. I went to you to help you fix it. And you drugged me, put me in a car, and signed me away to a man who took your money to keep me quiet." I watched my father shrink. The man who had loomed over my life like a mountain was now just a pile of dust in a silk robe. "I gave you everything," my father whispered, looking at me. "I gave you the struggle that made you strong." "No," I said, stepping up beside Leo. "You gave us nothing. We took everything you tried to hide and built a world where you don't exist. You're not a father. You're not even a Sterling anymore. You're just the man who lost to the children he tried to kill." Leo pulled a small black drive from his pocket. "I didn't just come here for an apology, Howard. I came for the kill switch. I've already uploaded the 1,992 records to the SEC. And I've sent the records of my commitment to the district attorney. You'll destroy the name." My father screamed. "The Sterling stock will hit zero by morning." "Good," Leo said. "Let it burn. We have the Thorn assets. We have the Phoenix Group. We don't need your name." Suddenly, the front door burst open. Sarah stood there, breathless, her face pale. She looked at me, then at the stranger standing next to me. "Who is he?" she whispered. "He's your brother, Sarah," I said. "The one Dad told us was dead." Sarah's eyes went wide. But she didn't run to him. She didn't cry. She looked at the floor, then at our father. "I knew," she whispered. The room went silent. "What?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I found the letters when I was 12, Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I found the payments. I knew Leo was alive. Dad told me that if I ever said a word, he'd do the same to me. He said he'd send me away and tell everyone I was unstable just like him." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a decade of suppressed terror. "That's why I treated you like trash, Elara. I had to be the perfect daughter. I had to be the one who stayed, or I'd end up in a room with no windows. I wasn't protecting him. I was surviving him. They say that fear is the ultimate motivator. My father didn't rule us with love, and he didn't even rule us with money. He ruled us with the threat of disappearance. Sarah wasn't my enemy. She was a hostage who had started to love her captor out of pure necessity. And as the sirens grew louder, I realized that the Sterling legacy wasn't a business, it was a crime scene. Sarah's confession hung in the air like a poisonous fog. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The designer clothes, the sharp tongue, the arrogance, it was all armor. She hadn't been laughing at me all those years because she thought I was a failure. She was laughing because she was terrified that if she showed me an ounce of sisterly love, our father would see it as a weakness and erase her too. But understanding her didn't mean the damage was undone. Because while I was building an empire, Sarah had been digging a hole so deep she had reached the bedrock of the family's ruin. The police are here, Sarah, I said, my voice low. If you knew about Leo, you're an accessory to kidnapping and false imprisonment. Why are you telling us this now? Because it doesn't matter anymore, Sarah cried, gesturing wildly at the walls of the estate. You think you own this place, Elara? You think the Phoenix Group holds the deed? You missed it. You missed the Sterling Vance secondary mortgage. I felt a jolt of panic. Arthur Vance? I handled him. He backed down. Arthur backed down, yes, Sarah hissed, wiping her eyes. But he didn't tell you that 6 months ago, I signed over the land rights to a private equity firm in Chicago to cover my own gambling debts. I was trying to make enough money to buy my way out from under Dad's thumb. I lost, Elara. I lost everything. I turned to Marcus. Is this true? How did we miss a land right, Leon? Marcus was frantically scrolling through his tablet. It was filed under a dormant agricultural subsidiary, Elara. It's a vulture fund called Blackwood Partners. They don't want the company. They want the dirt, and because the mortgage is in default, they've already triggered an automatic auction. In my haste to decapitate my father's leadership, I had ignored the ground beneath my feet. Blackwood Partners was notorious for stripping assets and leaving nothing but a skeleton behind. If they seized the land, they could legally evict the Phoenix Group's servers and freeze the Thorn assets tied to the estate. How much, Sarah? I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. How much did you lose? 50 million, she whispered. But with the predatory interest, it's closer to 80. A black sedan pulled up behind the police cruisers. A man in a gray suit, looking entirely too calm for a house currently being raided by the FBI, stepped out. He carried a leather briefcase like a weapon. That's him, Sarah whispered, pulling her blanket tighter. That's Miller. He's the liquidator. Leo stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. He's early. The auction isn't supposed to be for another 12 hours. Vultures don't wait for the heart to stop beating, I said. I walked to the front door to meet him. I was the billionaire CEO of a global empire, but standing on that porch, I felt like the girl in the bus station again, one signature away from being homeless. Miss Sterling, Miller said, his voice as dry as parchment. I assume you've been briefed. I'm here to serve the notice of immediate seizure. The land, the structures, and all unfixed assets, which includes your server racks, are now property of Blackwood Partners. You have no jurisdiction here until the morning, I said, standing my ground. Actually, Miller smiled, pulling a document from his case. The contract your sister signed includes a material change of circumstances clause. Your father's arrest? That's a material change. We've moved the timeline up. You have 2 hours to vacate. I looked back into the foyer. My father was being handcuffed by federal agents. Leo was standing over him like a vengeful shadow. Sarah was collapsed in a chair, and Marcus was signaling me that the servers were only 60% through the final encryption backup. If Miller walked in now and pulled the plugs, I wouldn't just lose the house, I'd lose the evidence needed to keep my father in prison. I'd lose the keys to the Thorn estate. I'd lose the war. 80 million, I said, looking Miller in the eye. I'll wire it to you right now. Plus a 10% convenience fee. It's not about the money anymore, Miss Sterling, Miller said, his eyes glinting with a dark greed. We've already pre-sold the land to a developer who wants to turn this lakefront into a resort. The contracts are signed. We want the keys. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Leo. He's lying, Elara, Leo whispered. Look at his shoes. They're salt-stained. He didn't come from Chicago. He came from the local airport. He's not here for the land. He's here for the drive. I frowned. What drive? The one Julian tried to wipe, Leo said, loud enough for Miller to hear. The one with the offshore access codes for the Sterling Vance Dark Fund. There's 400 million in untraceable crypto on that drive, and Blackwood Partners wants it to disappear so they can claim the insurance on the bankruptcy. Miller's face went from calm to murderous in a split second. He reached into his jacket not for a pen, but for a radio. Team 2, move in, he barked. Suddenly, 2 more cars sped up the driveway, flanking the police. Men who didn't look like lawyers or feds, men who looked like private mercenaries stepped out. This is a private seizure, Miss Sterling, Miller hissed. Get out of the way, or we'll remove you. I looked at Leo. He gave me a small, grim nod. I looked at the police, who were busy escorting my father and didn't seem to notice the new arrivals. Marcus, I yelled. Initiate the scorched earth protocol. Elara, no. Sarah screamed. If you do that, we all lose everything. I'd rather be a failure with nothing, I shouted back, than a billionaire who let a vulture win. They say that every man has his price. But they forget that some people aren't selling. I spent 10 years fighting to get back what was mine. But in that moment, I realized that true power isn't owning things, it's being willing to destroy them so the wrong person can't have them. I just hoped Leo was as good at building things back up as he was at tearing them down. The darkness was absolute. When I triggered the scorched earth protocol, I wasn't just killing the servers. I was cutting the umbilical cord to the world I had built. The humming of the house, the digital heartbeat of the Phoenix Group, the lights that had mocked me since I arrived, it all died in a single breath. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind rattling the windowpanes and the heavy, panicked breathing of the people in the foyer. Miller, the liquidator, let out a string of curses, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom like a frantic searchlight. What did you do? He roared. That data is worth more than your life, you stupid girl. I didn't destroy it, Miller, I said, my voice eerily calm in the dark. I just moved it. And since you're currently trespassing on a property with no power, no security, and no digital footprint, I suggest you leave before the FBI agents outside realize you're not part of their team. But then the house did something it wasn't supposed to do. A deep, subterranean rumble shook the floor. It wasn't the gas this time. It was mechanical. Beneath the grand staircase, a section of the floor, the very marble I had walked on as a child, began to recede with a slow, grinding shriek. Leo gripped my arm. The fail-safe, he whispered. I told you. I built it to break. But I didn't mean the company, Elara. I meant the house. As the floor opened, a hidden staircase appeared, leading down into the dark limestone bedrock of the lakefront. This wasn't on the blueprints. This wasn't in the digital archives Julian had hacked. This was a secret kept in stone and iron. What is this, Leo? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. The Thorn legacy, he said. The real one. The one Howard couldn't find because he was too busy looking at screens. Miller tried to lunge for the opening, but Leo was faster. He stepped into the path, his silhouette towering in the flashlight beam. This doesn't belong to Blackwood Partners, Leo said. This land was deeded to the Thorn heirs in 1920. My grandmother never folded it into the Sterling Trust. It's an Aladile title. It can't be mortgaged, and it can't be seized for debt. Sarah's signature on your contract? It's worthless. Miller's face twisted. You're bluffing. Go ahead, I said, stepping up beside my brother. Check the county records again. The paper ones. The ones in the basement of the courthouse that haven't been digitized yet. You'll find the Thorn name at the bottom of the stack. Defeated by a piece of paper older than his firm, Miller signaled his men to retreat. He knew when a kill was no longer profitable. As they backed out into the snow, I turned to the hole in the floor. We descended into the hidden vault. It wasn't filled with gold or cash. It was filled with boxes. Thousands of them. I opened the one nearest to me. Inside were journals. Handwritten, in an elegant, looping script. My grandmother, Evelyn Thorn. I picked one up and read the last entry, dated just days before her disappearance into the Sterling narrative. Howard is not what he seems. He has found a way to leverage the Thorn patents to fund his own private shadow. If I die, let it be known that my wealth was never meant for him. It was meant for the children who would have the courage to stand against him. I have hidden the true keys in the only place he will never look, the silence of the earth. There was more. Documents showing that my mother, Eleanor, hadn't just been a bystander. She had been the one who helped Evelyn hide the assets. She hadn't been playing both sides for greed, she had been protecting the core of the family wealth until one of us was strong enough to claim it. She knew, I whispered, looking at Leo. Mom knew we'd have to lose everything to find this. She knew Dad would destroy anything he could touch, Leo said, his fingers tracing the edges of an old stock certificate. She let him think he'd won so he'd stop looking. Suddenly, a shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. It was our mother. She wasn't in a taxi. She was standing there, her face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the foyer. You found it, she said. Her voice was no longer cold. It was weary. Why didn't you just tell me? I screamed, the echoes bouncing off the stone walls. Why did you let me spend 10 years in the cold? Because if I told you, you would have stayed, she said, stepping down the first few stairs. And if you had stayed, he would have broken you just like he broke Leo. You had to become the phoenix, Alara. You had to burn so that you could rise higher than his shadow. I looked at the certificates in the box. They weren't just for Sterling Holdings, they were for the land. The patents. The future. And now? I asked. And now, she said, you have a choice. You can take this wealth and disappear. Let the Sterling name die in the courts. Or, you can do what your grandmother wanted. Which is what? My mother looked at the two of us, the daughter who conquered and the son who survived. You can use it to buy the one thing your father never had, she said. Justice. But be warned. The people who funded Howard's rise. They aren't just businessmen. They're the ones who really own this state. And they're already on their way. They say that the truth is a weapon. But I realize that the truth is actually a target. My grandmother didn't leave us a fortune. She left us a war. And as the sound of the helicopters reached the roof, I knew that the real fight hadn't even started yet. The sky above Lake Minnetonka wasn't empty anymore. Two black, sleek transport helicopters hovered over the lawn, their spotlights carving circles into the snow. These weren't the police. These weren't the feds. These were the silent partners, the faceless consortium of old money interests that had used my father as a front for their less-than-legal regional monopolies for decades. They saw the Sterling collapse not as a family tragedy but as a security breach, and they were here to sanitize the site. They're coming for the vault, Leo said, his eyes reflected in the dull glow of a backup lantern. If those ledgers go public, half the political establishment in this state goes to prison. They won't let us walk out with those boxes. I looked at my mother. She was remarkably calm, staring up at the ceiling as dust shook loose from the vibrations. How long do we have? I asked. 6 minutes before they breach the front doors, Marcus's voice crackled over my headset. He had managed to patch into a local cellular node. Alara, these guys are private military. You need to leave. Now. No, I said, a cold fire spreading through my veins. We don't run. We broadcast. I turned to the Thorn journals. Inside the back cover of my grandmother's 1994 diary was a physical hardware key, a gold-plated USB drive, primitive but robust. Leo, you said you were inside their servers for 3 years, I said, handing him the key. Can you link this vault's hard copy records to the Phoenix Group's emergency satellite uplink? Leo's face transformed. The ghost was gone. The engineer was back. I can do better. I can dump the entire dark fund ledger onto every major news server in the country simultaneously. But I need a clear signal, and the helicopters are jamming the house. Then we give them a distraction, I said. I looked at Sarah. She was still shivering, but something in her eyes had changed when she saw the helicopters. The fear that had kept her a prisoner for 20 years was curdling into a righteous, ugly anger. Sarah, I said. I need you to be the perfect Sterling one last time. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice steadying. Walk out the front door. Carry a decoy box. Tell them you have the files and you're willing to negotiate for immunity. Lead them to the guest house. If you can keep them talking for 4 minutes, Leo can bypass the jammer. Sarah looked at the dark hallway, then at me. They might kill me, Alara. They want the data more than they want your blood, I said, gripping her hand. And I'll be right behind you in the shadows with Marcus's security team. I promise. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her ruined designer dress, and grabbed a heavy box of old tax returns. She walked toward the light. As Sarah stepped onto the porch, the spotlights converged on her. I watched from the darkened library window. Men in tactical gear swarmed the lawn, their weapons leveled. I have what you want. Sarah's voice echoed across the snow, surprisingly strong. But I want a signed agreement. I want my name cleared. While she held their attention, Leo was in the vault, his fingers dancing across a portable deck. Jamming is local to the front of the house. Leo whispered. I'm routing the signal through the copper plumbing using the house itself as an antenna. Alara. It's working. The Thorn files are moving. On my tablet, I watched the progress bar. 10%, 30%, 55%. The men on the lawn were closing in on Sarah. A tall man in a tailored overcoat stepped out from the lead helicopter. He didn't look like a soldier, he looked like a senator. "Give us the box, Sarah," the man said. "And we can all go home." "Not until I see the paperwork," Sarah shouted. "Bifenjabasher, Bifenjajoshawu." The man in the overcoat signaled to his men. They grabbed the box from Sarah's arms and shoved her to the ground. They ripped the lid open, only to find stacks of worthless paper. "It's a decoy," the man roared. "Find the girl. Level the house if you have to." "Too late," I whispered. 100% complete. Broadcast live. Suddenly, every phone on the lawn began to chime. The soldiers hesitated, reaching for their pockets. The man in the overcoat pulled out his own device. His face went from arrogant to ghostly white in seconds. The Thorn files, the proof of 30 years of bribery, land theft, and the disappearance of Leo Sterling were now on the front pages of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Reddit. The silent partners were no longer silent. They were exposed. I stepped out onto the porch, standing over the fallen Sarah. I held my phone up, the screen glowing with the viral headlines. "The police are 10 minutes away, and this time, they aren't coming for my father." I shouted over the roar of the rotors. "They're coming for the Vanguard accounts. And I've already sent your flight plans to the FAA. You aren't leaving this lake." The man in the overcoat looked at the house, then at the sky. He knew the game was over. He turned toward his helicopter, but a new set of lights appeared on the horizon. State police, dozens of them. But as I looked down at Sarah, I realized she wasn't looking at the police. She was looking at the guest house. "Elara," she gasped, pointing. "Dad. He's not in the cruiser." I turned. The guest house door was swinging open. My father, having somehow slipped his guards in the chaos, was standing there with a flare gun. He wasn't looking at the soldiers. He was looking at the main house, at us. "If I can't have the legacy," he screamed, his voice lost in the wind, "then there is no legacy. They say that justice is blind, but I think justice is just exhausted." My father didn't want to survive his sins. He wanted to be the one who wrote the ending. I had won the war, I had saved the money, and I had found my brother. But as the guest house erupted in flames, I realized the cost of the Sterling name was always going to be blood. Fire has a way of cleaning things. It doesn't care about stock prices or legacy, or the weight of a billion-dollar empire. It just consumes. I stood on the lawn, my arm around Sarah, as we watched the guest house go up. The flare my father had fired hadn't hit the main house. Leo had tackled him just as the trigger clicked. The flare had arched back into the dry cedar siding of the guest wing, igniting the very room where my father had kept his private records. He wasn't in the flames. He was sitting on the snow, handcuffed once again, watching 40 years of his life turn into a pillar of black smoke. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was just empty. The next few hours were a blur of blue lights and legal statements. The silent partners had vanished into the night, but their digital footprints were being hunted by every federal agency in the country. My father was led away in a silent cruiser, his eyes fixed on the ground. He didn't look back at the house, and he didn't look at us. "It's over, isn't it?" Sarah asked. She was sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over her shoulders. For the first time in my life, she looked like my sister, not my rival. "The war is over, Sarah," I said, sitting beside her. "But the cleanup is going to take a long time." Leo walked over to us, his face smudged with soot. He held a charred ledger he'd managed to pull from the edge of the fire. "The Thorn estate is secure," he said. The allodial title held up. "The land, the house. It's all legally ours now. But more importantly, the dark fund has been frozen. We're using the assets to set up the restitution fund." We stayed at the estate that night. Not in our old rooms, but in the grand library, huddled together around the fireplace. My mother sat in the corner, nursing a cup of tea. She had finally stopped playing the game. She looked like a woman who had spent 30 years holding her breath and had finally been allowed to exhale. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I should have been stronger. I should have protected you both." "You did what you could to keep the core alive, Mom," Leo said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But the price was too high. We aren't going to live like this anymore." I looked at my brother and my sister. We were the Sterling heirs, but the name felt different now. It didn't feel like a crown. It felt like a responsibility. "We're selling the company," I announced. Sarah looked up, startled. "What?" But you fought so hard for it. I fought to take it away from him, I said. But the Sterling Holdings Group is a monument to greed. I'm breaking it up. Selling the subsidiaries to the employees. Turning the tech division into an open-source foundation. We're keeping the Thorn legacy but the Sterling name, that ends tonight. Leo walked to the window, looking out at the lake. I want to turn this house into a retreat, he said. For people like me. For the ones the world tried to erase. A place where they can find their names again. I smiled. I think Grandmother Evelyn would like that. I walked out onto the porch one last time before the sun came up. The air was still, the blizzard a distant memory. The snow was a perfect, unblemished white, covering the scars of the night's battle. I thought about the girl in the bus station. I thought about the hunger, the cold, and the biting loneliness of those years in New York. I realized then that my father hadn't made me strong. He had tried to break me, and in the process, I had found a strength he couldn't even comprehend the strength to let go. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, gold-plated USB drive, the one that held the final encryption keys to the Sterling wealth. I walked to the edge of the pier, the ice groaning beneath my feet. Elara? I turned. It was Marcus. He looked at the drive in my hand. That's nearly $500 million in untraceable assets, boss. You could do anything with that. You could build a new empire. I don't want a new empire, Marcus, I said. I want a life. I looked at the dark water beneath the ice. But just as I prepared to toss the drive, my phone buzzed. A text message, no sender ID. Text, the fire didn't burn everything, Elara. Check the safety deposit box in Zurich. Your father wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Ask your mother about the other Sterling. I froze. My breath hitched in the cold air. I looked back at the house at my mother sitting by the fire, looking so innocent, so relieved. The war wasn't over. It had just changed fronts. They say that every family has skeletons in the closet, but in my family, the closet is a labyrinth, and every time you think you've reached the end, you find another door. I had found my brother. I had defeated my father. But I was starting to realize that the Sterling name was a curse that didn't just end with a fire. The message on my phone was a ghost's last whisper. For a long minute, I stood on that pier, the gold USB drive cold against my palm. I looked back at the house, at the silhouettes of my mother, my brother, and my sister silhouetted against the warm glow of the library fire. I thought about the other Sterling. I thought about Zurich. I thought about the endless cycle of greed that had nearly swallowed us all. And then, I did something my father could never have done. I watched the gold drive sink through a crack in the ice. I didn't need to know the secret in Zurich. I didn't need the last $500 million. The cost of knowing was the life I had just won back. And for the first time the price was too high. I chose the silence. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of transformation. The Sterling name was removed from the building in Minneapolis, replaced by a simple, elegant plaque, the Thorn Foundation for Restorative Justice. Sarah didn't go to prison. Leo and I made sure of that. Instead, she took over the management of the refugee housing project we funded with the remnants of the Sterling General Fund. She traded her silk for flannel, and for the first time in her life, she started sleeping through the night. My mother moved to a small cottage on the coast of Maine. She never spoke of the other Sterling, and I never asked. We don't talk often, but when we do, she sounds lighter, like the silk cage has finally turned to dust. And Leo? Leo stayed at the estate. He turned the closet of failure into an art studio. He doesn't draw maps anymore. He draws the lake. He draws the sunrise. He draws a future that isn't dictated by the ghosts of the past. I sat in my new office, a small, sun-drenched space in the city with no mahogany and no marble. On my desk sat the only thing I took from the Wayzata estate, the blue folder of my grandmother's journals. I realized then that legacy isn't something you inherit. It's not a bank account or a name on a skyscraper. Legacy is the choice you make when you have every reason to be cruel, but you choose to be kind instead. My father built a kingdom of fear and called it success. I dismantled that kingdom and called it freedom. 10 years ago, I was a girl in a bus station with nothing but a bruised spirit. Today, I am a woman who knows exactly who she is. To those of you watching, who feel like the failure of your own story, remember this. The fire that is meant to consume you can also be the fire that lights your way out. You are not the mistakes of your parents. You are not the debt you carry. You are the architect of your own return. If this story moved you, If it reminded you that you're stronger than the labels they've put on you, then you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button. Join our circle. Because we don't just tell stories on this channel, we build empires of the spirit. And if you're ready for the next chapter of your own life, leave a comment below with one word: rise. I'll see you in the next story.